Good afternoon and welcome to our event on announcing the impacts of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. I am Brian Anderson. I am the Executive Director of the Interagency Working Group on Coal and Power Plant Communities and Economic Revitalization. I'm also the Director of the National Energy Technology Laboratory, one of the Department of Energy's 17 national labs. In case you're just joining the IWG, the Interagency Working Group on Coal and Power Plant Communities for the first time, the Interagency Working Group was kicked off by President Biden during his first week in office as part of the executive order on tackling the climate crisis domestically and abroad. And in providing federal leadership in partnership with coal, oil, gas, and power plant communities, our mission in the IWG is to create good paying union jobs and to spur economic revitalization in the energy communities that have powered our country for more than a century. To action this commitment, the president established the Interagency Working Group across not just the Department of Energy, represented by myself and Deputy Secretary Turk, who will join me in a moment, but also across 11 different federal agencies for us to coordinate on the federal side to provide the types of resources that will help spur the economic redevelopment and revitalization in energy communities across the country. We released a report earlier this year. You can find the report and all kinds of resources at energycommunities.gov. This is our clearinghouse, our one-stop shop for energy communities. Now, today, we're going to talk about a big picture overview of the infrastructure bill itself and the relevancy to energy communities. If you've taken a look, it is chock full of very impactful investments that the federal government is going to make into our energy communities, everything from infrastructure to abandoned mine reclamation to advanced energy projects to plugging orphan and abandoned oil and gas wells, and certainly to ensure that every American has access to reliable high-speed internet through historic investments. Also, the IIJA reauthorized the Appalachian Regional Commission, providing it with $1 billion over 5 years, and many, many other investments that I'm going to ask our panelists to talk about today. I am delighted to have Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Department of Energy, David Turk, with us, as I mentioned. Deputy Secretary Turk's efforts in the Department of Energy in the Obama-Biden administration are remembered well, as he helped spearhead a launch of Mission Innovation, a global effort to enhance clean energy innovation. And since then, and before joining the Biden-Harris administration at the Department of Energy, he served as the Deputy Executive Director of the International Energy Agency, where he focused on helping countries around the world tackle their clean energy transitions. David, I would like for you to give us a little insight in the Department of Energy investments in the infrastructure bill, and also the Department of Energy stewardship of the Interagency Working Group.
Well, thanks, Brian, for the introduction, and thank you for. I think you've got at least 2 full-time jobs, probably 4 full-time jobs if you add up everything that you're working on. Doing such a phenomenal job with our National Energy Technology Laboratory, which is one of our crown jewels of our 17 national labs throughout the DOE system. But also your full-time job and then some, and a real passion on this this working group as well. Something that I think all of us feel not only professionally committed to, but very personally committed to it as well. And Brian, you live and breathe that. A big thank you as well to everyone responsible for this bipartisan infrastructure legislation. President Biden and his leadership, our White House colleagues who you'll hear from soon, phenomenal work on that front. Senators from both sides of the aisle, our Chairman Manchin, among them from our authorizing committee in the Senate side, proving democracy can work for the betterment of people's, real people's lives out there throughout the U.S. And then a big thank you for those of you who are from energy communities. Thank you for all that you have done for our country to literally power our economy and be the engine, be the literal power and energy that makes everything work, and for all of your partnership going forward. In the intro, what I'd like to just do, Brian, is really underscore how this bipartisan infrastructure legislation is going to allow us at the Department of Energy to be a much, much better partner and much, much more impactful partner going forward. Within the huge swaths, and you mentioned some of that broadband, other kinds of things in the bill, there's $62 billion that we're going to be entrusted with at the Department of Energy in order to be a better partner in all sorts of ways. And we can get into this as part of the discussion here. For us to be successful, we're going to need to hear from and listen, really truly listen to communities out there. What are your challenges? What are your opportunities? What are the industries that you'd like to have more of going forward? Supply chains, manufacturing capabilities, and how can we use these $62 billion worth of authorities and tools along with everything else that we can bring to the table from the department, working with our interagency partners to better support communities, to listen to communities, to act on communities with a sense of urgency and efficiency along those lines. And that's what we're fundamentally doing, along with, as you said, Brian, the many, many other interagency partners on this.
David, thank you so much, and really appreciate your leadership in the department. And it is a real honor to introduce Samantha Silverberg, who just this week was named Deputy Director of the Infrastructure Investment Task Force that President Biden created to oversee implementation of this new law that we're here to learn about more today. Samantha, who previously served as Special Assistant to the President for Transportation and Infrastructure Policy, volunteered on the Biden-Harris transition team in several capacities. And prior to that, she was Deputy Chief Administrative Officer and Senior Director of Capital Planning at the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority. And me, as a former rider of the T, thank you for that. But Samantha, there's so much to talk about in terms of infrastructure and the impact. Would you mind giving us a quick intro?
Yeah, sure. And thanks, Brian, for that intro, and for Deputy Secretary Turk for being here as well. I think we talk a lot about the dollars in this bill, but I think it's really powerful to take a step back and think about the outcomes, what it will actually mean for our communities to have safe drinking water, to have access to broadband, to have safe and reliable transportation. Infrastructure is when it works, you don't think about it, and when it fails, it's front of mind. And you all in your communities, I think know that potentially better than anyone. And so, we can go, and I think we will go through some of the highlights in the bill, but I just want to emphasize a couple things at the top. One, it is no accident that this proposal started as being called the American Jobs Plan. This is fundamentally about jobs and creating good jobs, both in the direct task of rebuilding our infrastructure, but also in all the industries that will be needed to support the development and creation of our infrastructure. So, manufacturing and all of the net effects beyond that. And then all of the industries and businesses that will support when we have better infrastructure. The supply chains that we can unclog and unlock, the competitiveness that we can spur across our country. So, this is fundamentally about jobs, and it's about jobs all across the country. This is a broad-based bill. There will be investment in every community. And so what that means from our perspective is jobs in every community. Another thing I'd like to say at the top line is that, we recognize that in our history as a nation, certain communities have been left behind. Investment has not always been done in an equitable manner. And in your communities, I think, are certainly among those. And so a key priority of this administration will be to be very thoughtful about how resources are deployed and delivered, and make sure that all communities have access to those resources, whether they are very wealthy or very poor, and we're here to help and make that real. And then that brings me to my third point, which is that I think something like 95% of the resources in this bill will fundamentally be delivered by entities other than the federal government. And so our success is your success, and we are going to have to work very closely in partnering with states, cities, counties, towns, tribes, territories, businesses, nonprofits. I mean, this is going to be a great national project, and it is going to take all of us working side by side to get it done. Those are a couple of top lines. I will also note that we just came off our first task force cabinet meeting. So when we get to that part of the agenda, I'm happy to share some of the insights that we just learned. Thanks, Brian.
Well, Samantha, thank you so much. And as you mentioned, all the coordination that needs to go on, not just across the federal government, but with the private sector, with the public sector, local, state, and regional governments and economic development organizations. And the fit to the interagency working group is terrific. We're doing this in the context of the fact that we have a climate crisis and we are navigating the energy system of the future. It's a historic time to make the investments. And so it's a real pleasure to introduce John Rhodes, who's a special assistant to President Biden for climate policy. Most recently, before this appointment, John served as chairman of New York's Public Service Commission and CEO of its Department of Public Service. There, he developed and implemented ambitious, equitable, and practical clean energy policies to ensure reliability and to protect communities. Prior to those roles, he worked as president and CEO of the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority and director of the Center for Market Innovation at the Natural Resources Defense Council. And so, John, with your tremendous experience, this is an opportunity of a lifetime for us, is it not? Colin, you're muted.
Well, I think it's the opportunity of a lifetime for America. I mean, this is the largest investment ever in really just simply a better future for American families and American communities in clean energy, in the physical and natural and energy systems that we need for that, but also to catch up on in areas of just neglect and underinvestment over decades. We've talked about water and safe water. We've talked about lack of broadband, but there's also just a cleanup task. We've got hundreds of thousands of sites and thousands of communities across the country that are not clean, and we have an environmental justice challenge. And this bill builds the clean new future, or this investment builds the clean new future while catching up on those areas of neglect and underinvestment. And you gave me my bio. You gave my bio. I'm a state and local guy, and this investment is really designed to be an exercise in partnership, to listen, to respond, as David was saying, but also to give you the communities the tools and the decision making that you need to revitalize your futures. And while you're at it, deliver millions of good, high labor standard jobs that are just going to be the bedrock for a better local economy. So it is the opportunity of a lifetime. Thank you.
Well, John, thank you so much. And you touched on environmental remediation, clean drinking water, the opportunity to clean up a legacy. And so that's certainly a very place-based topic in energy communities today. And so this has a great potential in the very near term for action, for near-term jobs, does it not?
Yes. So I think it's just a natural opportunity to invest in. I think that the repair work is worth doing for its own sake. And the fact that we can do the repair work or the catch-up work in a way that is so good for the local economy and the local economics. There are good paying jobs in all of this, in the broadband, in the remediation of the Superfund site, in the good, whatever, deployment of say clean energy on brownfields. It's just a job engine as well. So it's really promising and exciting.
Yeah, absolutely, John. I'm glad you mentioned that brownfields, EPA brownfields program. More to come. Information there, and in the electrical grid. So, David, would you mind speaking a little bit to the investments in the foundational infrastructure and the modernization and resiliency of our electrical grid and how those investments are in these energy communities.
Yeah, happy to do so, Brian. And I just have to underscore something Samantha and John mentioned, and you mentioned this too, Brian, just how important the jobs piece of this is. You've heard, hopefully everyone's heard repeatedly from President Biden, Secretary Granholm, all of us in this administration, just how focused we are from the job side of things. I personally grew up in a small town in the middle of nowhere, a steel mill community, where the steel mill was shutting down throughout my childhood. And just to see the impact on job loss, to see the impact on, as the president says, and he says this as eloquently, more eloquently than any politician I've ever had a chance and privilege to work for. Now, it's not just the paycheck, it's the dignity of that job and what that means in your family, what that means in your community, along those lines. So it really does come down to jobs. It comes down to real communities. This is not abstract stuff. This is why, as John said, as I've said, as Brian, all of us, we've got to listen to communities. That's not always the thing DC does the best. I've got to be honest with you, is listening. There's a lot more talking that goes on here than listening. But if we're going to be successful, we've got to listen. And this is why it's so key to have the kind of group that Brian's leading with the interagency to make sure we're all on the same page. We're listening, we're doing this efficiently, et cetera, et cetera. So I just needed to mention that. One of the pieces, to answer your direct question, sorry, Brian, to answer your direct question, one of the pieces we're most excited about at the Department of Energy is on the grid. Making sure our electricity grid is as resilient, reliable, as affordable as it can be. There's some significant investments in this bipartisan infrastructure bill just exactly for that, including to build new transmission lines and make sure that we can bring power where it needs to go along those lines. I have to mention as well, we've got some phenomenal demonstration program money for some key technologies like hydrogen hubs, like CCUS, like other key technologies that are going to be so important, as Brian says, as we tackle the climate crisis and do it in a way that works for American communities and again, jobs, jobs, jobs.
Well, David, thanks. And the new investments in new and advanced technologies, demonstrating hydrogen hubs and CCUS hubs, by default, they're going to be in energy communities. And other energy communities that might not be the place to put the CCUS hub or the hydrogen hub need some investments in creating their economic advantage, their competitive advantage to attract the private sector. And some of that's in transportation and infrastructure and certainly broadband to enable the economy of the 21st century for these communities. Samantha, can you speak a little to those bits of foundational infrastructure?
Yeah, absolutely. So on broadband, quickly, this is a truly remarkable investment. We've made a commitment to bring high-speed broadband to the whole country, and so that's going to be done through a variety of programs. There's a large program running through the Commerce Department, which will provide allocations state by state at a minimum of $100 million per state. There's also a benefit through the FCC to make sure that broadband can be affordable. So no family who has access has to also worry about affordability. And then there's also $2 billion for rural broadband access through the Reconnect program at USDA. And I'll tell you, one of my new bosses, Mitch Landrieu's first conversations was with Secretary Vilsack, who speaks very eloquently about how critical broadband is to rural communities and how much opportunity it can unlock. And that will certainly be something, we're focused on. On the transportation side, this bill is both an authorization and it's also additional funding. And there's some really exciting pieces really in both sides of that. A couple things to highlight. There's an additional $110 billion for roads, bridges, and major projects. For some of the existing programs, the authorization increases set-asides, carve-outs for rural communities and off-system, which is investments off the interstate highway system. One investment we're very excited about is a total of $40 billion for bridges, which is the biggest investment in bridges since the creation of the interstate highway system. A minimum of around $4 billion of that would be dedicated to bridges on local roads. Those off-system bridges, as they're called, make up around 2/3 of the 45,000 bridges that are currently in poor condition. And we were really excited to send the president to one of those in New Hampshire on Tuesday, where he was in a town of 1,300 people. There's a bridge that was in poor condition and is about to be downgraded further, which means that a fire truck responding to a local emergency would have to detour 10 miles out of the way. And I'm sure you all are familiar with situations like that. For bridges like that on local roads off the interstate highway system, federal government would cover 100% of the costs. There would be no local match, which I know is a particular issue of concern for under-resourced communities. A couple other things. There's a new rural surface transportation grant program, which sets aside 25% of its funds for the Appalachian Development Highway System. There's also a specific appropriation for an additional $1.25 billion for the Appalachian Development Highway System. And as Brian mentioned, the bill reauthorizes and provides $1 billion to the ARC. So there's some significant resources there, as well as really every other mode of transportation you can think of. And when we think of the supply chain, I'll say it's not just the Port of LA and Long Beach, but it's also all those nodes along the way. Those could be locks and dams and inland waterways. Those can be freight transfer hubs. Those are places in all parts of the country. And we're going to need more of that capacity as we build and grow our economy. And so, I think that's another place where some of your communities can really play a role.
Samantha, thank you so much. And when we think of a lot of the communities that have the deficits in the investments in the infrastructure, they're really the underserved communities, including many of the energy communities. And so, John, if you could speak a little bit on how some of the investments are targeting these underserved communities, broader than what we've talked about now, including environmental justice, energy justice, EJ considerations. And you're on mute again, John.
So the targeting of the funds to the communities that you just mentioned, and the creation of whatever community decision making and control over the use of funds in those communities is just at the center of the programs that deal with these issues. That's going to take a whole of government approach. President Biden doesn't have a lot of patience for silos, and this agency does that, and the other agency does something else. It needs to work for the community. So the process is going to be that we understand your needs, and you help us tell us how to solve them. And the communities that have been too long exposed to these deficits, like environmental justice, and have too many of the problematic assets in your community and not enough of the productive ones, you're going to come first. That's just it's as strong as that.
Well, John, thank you. And the half hour is flying by, and I'm gonna tee up two last questions, and it's about implementation. And so, David, I want to ask you a little bit of a curveball. I don't think I prepped you for this, but we're really looking at deployment, and this is a focus, the infrastructure bill and the administration. So the role of the Department of Energy in terms of how we're going to push these innovative technologies out into the marketplace is being accelerated by this. And so could you speak to how the deployment of these next generation technologies sets us up for the next century?
Yeah, absolutely, Brian. And I know you've heard a lot of rhetoric coming from DC for many, many years. And some of it's justified and some of it's not always justified. But I think one thing that is justified is the real historic once in a generation opportunity. These are fun. This is a lot of money, even for your federal government. These are the kinds and scales of investment, whether it's on the transportation side, whether it's on the broadband side, whether it's on the grid side, whether it's on the energy technology side. that can have an impact at scale in communities around our country. And I think the key part here is we need to focus and again listen to communities and work with communities to figure out what are those particular technologies, where is your future 10, 20, 30 years from now, and how can we be smart working together to identify that, to use the tools, use the authorities, use the funding that we now have in our tool belt to help you succeed, and to help you succeed in the near term and to help you succeed in the medium and longer term. Energy is incredibly dynamic right now. We see that in the markets. We see that in the technology development. Where will hydrogen be in 10, 20 years? Where will batteries be in 10, 20 years? Where will storage be in that kind of time period? How can we make sure that we don't just talk about these things in the abstract or have a roadmap for these things in the abstract? How do we have a roadmap that works for my hometown of Rock Falls, Illinois? How do we have a roadmap that works for pick your own community and put your own community in there? It's going to require work. It's going to require, and this is the piece, Brian, that keeps me up at night the most is how do we make sure we're a good partner? How do we make sure we have an efficient mechanism to be helpful to communities? That's where, Brian, all the work that you're doing in this interagency working group is so absolutely key. It's not something the federal government has always been good at, to be perfectly candid and to be perfectly honest. And that's what we need to really do a much, much better job. So we're trying to work through all sorts of ways that we can do that. But it ultimately has to be community driven and community informed. And we need to do a lot more listening and, again, tailoring what we can bring to the table. We've got a lot of tools now, thanks to your senators, thanks to your members of Congress. We now need to utilize those tools in ways that help particular communities, real communities.
Absolutely, David and Samantha. I know you're right in the middle. This is not going to be successful unless we are good at implementation. How are we going to do that?
We're going to do that together. Just to kind of recap this week, which has been quite the roller coaster. I guess only up, no downs. The president signed the bill on Monday. Wow, what an event, surrounded by hundreds of people representing communities all across the country. We had mayors and governors, members of Congress, members of labor, business, really, I think, demonstrating that it takes a huge coalition to get us where we have now reached, but it's going to take an even bigger coalition to actually deliver and execute. Also on Monday, the president named Mayor Mitch Landrieu, former mayor of New Orleans, former lieutenant governor of Louisiana, to be our infrastructure implementation coordinator. Also signs an executive order establishing a task force of cabinet secretaries to lead and coordinate implementation. And then today we had our first meeting. So we are wasting no time, moving as quickly as possible. So for everyone who thinks the federal government is slow, we are moving very fast right now. That said, this is fundamentally a long-term transformation of our country and our economy, and it's going to take time to rebuild. And now I'll contradict myself by saying, we know that there are many communities around the country that can't wait. And so we are trying to move as fast as we can. Mayor Landrieu laid out some of his key principles earlier today, which I think will resonate with this group and is very consistent with the work that you all are doing. First is on time, on task, on budget. It is important that we are good stewards of taxpayer dollars and that we are delivering towards our outcomes. We take this very seriously and are committed to accountability and transparency in doing so. Another mayor says vertical and horizontal integration, which I actually think is precisely what this working group is doing. Thinking across the federal family, but also going deep down into our communities and understanding that it takes so many different stakeholders and partners to actually execute and get things done. Another is facilitate, link, and leverage. There's so much good work going on out there. And so where we can add value and be a force multiplier is pulling it together, not duplicating effort, not doing what other people are doing, but rather finding where are those pockets of excellence and lifting them up and connecting them to one another. And then one team, one fight, one voice. I mean, again, this is I think, Secretary Buttigieg says it, and I've heard the president say it, and now Mayor Landrieu is saying it. There is no Democratic bridge. There is no Republican bridge. There are needs everywhere in the country, and we are going to truly do this together. And so, our commitment and certainly the philosophy that Mitch brings is that this is a great national project. The federal government is only one piece of the puzzle, and we're going to need the support and engagement of all of our communities to actually get it done. I expect this is really just the start of a dialogue, and he's going to spend a lot of his time trying to tell the story from the ground up. He's already been talking to us about changing our framing from this big transformational vision to the kids sitting in the field who can't access online school, right? Or a woman sitting in her home that just flooded out. Think about it in the terms of people. Okay, now we're over time, and I think I'm getting the hook. So.
Well,
Thank
Samantha,
you.
There's no way we could cover the breadth and depth and the impact of this bill in a half an hour. But John, David, and Samantha, thank you so much. Those who tuned in today, you're going to see a lot more. And with that, there's going to be a fact sheet coming out on what the infrastructure bill means for energy communities. We have upcoming workshops in both the nearest term workshops in both Wyoming, Kentucky. You see the website energycommunities.gov. This is our one-stop shop clearinghouse for opportunities. We'll be populating it with the opportunities from the infrastructure bill. You'll find it under the resources tab. So with that, I thank everyone, and I think we have a lot to do. And so have a great afternoon, and appreciate your interest, and let's go build some American innovation and deploy it out into the world. Thank you all.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.